All right, thanks everyone for being here. Thanks to Liz for organizing this. Thanks to the Sierra Club and all of its chapters, and um, all of you for all of your work for the environment. I am Save the Frogs founder, Dr. Kerry Kriger, and I am going to be talking about amphibians, their natural history, give you some cool frog facts, talk about the threats that amphibians face, why they're important, ways that we can all save them, and some of the work that Save the Frogs has been doing since I founded Save the Frogs in 2008. I founded Save the Frogs because there was no public charity dedicated exclusively to amphibians, and amphibians unfortunately have been rapidly disappearing around the world. So the mission of Save the Frogs is to protect amphibian populations and to promote a society that respects and appreciates nature and wildlife. So let me go ahead and get my presentation up on the screen. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen now. So here's a frog that most of you are probably familiar with, most common frog in your part of California, the Pacific Coast frog. So I'll be talking about amphibians, mostly about frogs, but amphibians in general. We're called Save the Frogs, but we are an amphibian conservation organization. Frogs are the most well-known group of amphibians. So there's 5 main groups of amphibians, or we could actually think of it as 3 groups more precisely, because there's frogs and toads, but all toads are frogs. So toads are just a type of frog, and we can usually tell the difference because the toads have a big parotid gland right here behind their eardrum, and that's got lots of toxins in it to protect them. Toads tend to be pretty slow moving, so they're not going to hop erratically like frogs are doing. So to protect themselves, they've got all those toxins. And then we've got the salamanders, tailed amphibians. Amphibians can live in lots of different habitats, rainforests, deserts, high mountains. Like this salamander was up above snow line in the Cascades. And we've got the newts. So newts are just one type of salamander. The newts have lots of toxins on their skin, actually very toxic enough to kill a person, but they're not going to attack you, so you don't have to worry about them. Just probably don't handle them. If you do happen to touch a newt, then try to wash your hands. Definitely don't stick your fingers in your mouth or your eye. And then we've got the caecilians. So we've got the frogs and toads, salamanders and newts, and then the caecilians, the limbless amphibians. Caecilians are fossorial, meaning that they're usually hanging out underground. They're not going to be congregating around a pond calling like frogs would be often doing. So it's hard to find them. I've actually never seen a caecilian out in the wild, just because you got to get lucky to see them. You got to be out in the rainforest on a very rainy day or night and happen to walk by one. Now, you've probably heard the term herpetology, herpetofauna. So herpetology is the study of amphibians and or reptiles. And the term actually comes from hundreds of years ago when scientists falsely thought that amphibians and reptiles were the same, but they're not the same. This is a reptile here, and we can see that reptiles have scales. So the reptiles, lizards, snakes, crocodiles, tuataras, caimans, and other animals that have scales, unlike amphibians. Some other differences: when the reptiles have eggs, they're a hard shell, and that can help to protect them, which is different from the amphibians. When they have eggs, they're soft shelled, and that's why they have to be in wet places. That's why amphibians become active in the rainy season and are usually found around ponds, swamps, streams, rivers. So foothill yellow-legged frogs, Sunol Wilderness in Alameda County, that's where I found these guys in the water. And same location, California red-legged frog, egg mass underwater, keeping them moist, because if they dry out, then they will die. Another difference between the amphibians and reptiles: metamorphosis, so they've got gills. Their tail will not drop off when they metamorphose. It's going to go back into their body. They can use that for energy. Pop out some legs, pop out some arms, crawl out of the water for most species, and they'll be a metamorph for potentially a few weeks, somewhere between an adult and a tadpole. And then they'll have, in almost all species, external fertilization, and their mating embrace is called amplexus, and the cycle continues. So some important things to keep in mind about amphibians: their skin is permeable. Our skin is meant to keep stuff out and protect us, but their skin, they can get oxygen and water directly through their skin. So there are lungless amphibians as adults. They can just get all their oxygen through their water. They can get all their oxygen straight through their skin. That's usually up in the high mountain streams, which have a lot of dissolved oxygen in the water. Frogs, when they're adults, they're carnivorous, and they are called gape-limited predators. That means they're going to eat whatever they can fit in their mouth. If it's alive and they can put it in their mouth, then they're going to eat it. So it doesn't matter if it's a sack of insect eggs, another frog, a snake, a bird, whatever they can catch and put into their mouth. All right, so how many amphibian species exist worldwide? One of the sites that I visit the most, probably the site I visit the most related to amphibians, aside from SaveTheFrogs.com, is amphibiaweb.org, created by UC Berkeley. And so that's the best place to go if you ever want to know how many species there are. So as of today, 8,301 known amphibian species, of which about 7,300 of those are frogs and toads, 800 or so are the salamanders and newts, and then a couple hundred species of caecilians. All right, so as I said before, I grew up in Virginia. This is the pond that I hung out at for a lot of my childhood and still like to visit. And so now I know that there's about 7 amphibian species that can potentially be found there. And so when I was growing up, I would sleep with the windows open in the summer, and I'd sometimes hear and so I'd have these sounds of frogs coming into my ears subconsciously in the night. Spring peeper is the most common frog in the northeast U.S. First frog to come out when the ice thaws. So we can tell this is a male frog right here because we can see its vocal sac. Only the male frogs are calling. And eventually, after all these frog calls seeped into my subconscious, I decided to go to Australia to do my Ph.D. research. So I went to Australia in 2003. I had spent probably 6 or 7 years before that doing a lot of traveling around the world, backpacking, hiking, camping out, visiting national parks, and unfortunately seeing a lot of habitat destruction. So I wanted to do something about that and thought the best way would be to pursue a career in environmental science. And so I spent a lot of my time in Australia going out looking for frogs, sampling frogs for a skin disease called chytridiomycosis that I'll be talking about, and just running a cotton swab over their skin, and I'd let them go. And I did a lot of that right here at Purlingbrook Falls, one of my favorite places. So at night, because most frogs are nocturnal, would go out there with a volunteer to the top of the falls, walk down to the bottom, and there'd be about 10 different species living there. Cascade tree frogs. And I got pretty good at making frog calls because I found out that if you make the frog call well, then the angry territorial male frog will call back to let you know that this is his territory. Frog calls, they're called advertisement calls. They're either advertising for a mate or advertising that this is their territory. So if I wanted to catch the frogs, which I would do with a 20 by 25 centimeter plastic sandwich bag, put that on my hand, catch a frog, which would make it hard for the frog to just jump through my fingers, and also it would prevent disease transmission between all these frogs that I was picking up. So use a unique plastic bag, catch a frog, run a cotton swab over it in a set manner, and then let the frog go. Emerald spotted tree frogs. Every frog has a unique call. That's one way species it is. We can tell a lot about the frogs by looking at their feet, their toe pads, if they have them. Tree frogs need to climb, so they need that suck and on their feet to climb up. And we can also see the webbing here. If a frog species tends to spend some time in the water, they will probably have some webbing. If they never go to the water, probably won't have that webbing there. Southern orange-eyed tree frog, my favorite frog species. And scarlet-sided Palablanca happy frog. They get their name because they go bark, bark. And you can see, look at his feet right there, and there's no webbing at all there. Terrestrial frog. Eastern sedge frog, so you all should be able to tell that this is a male frog. If there's a vocal sac, then it's a male frog. And this frog does pretty well around humans. You'll find them in suburban ponds, and they can deal with car pollution and all that bad stuff that ends up in those ponds. They do just fine in that type of habitat. Great barred frog, they get their name from the bars, the stripes on their legs. They're one of different birds. It's the only one that's not endangered. We can see a mosquito up on his eye. And they're a big frog. Big frogs have deep calls. Or striped marsh frog. So this is probably the world's easiest frog call. So hopefully all of you can join in with me for a frog calling international frog course, because I'm actually in Colombia right now. So here's this call right here. That is, so if you're out there and you're unmuted, if I can hear any. Oh yeah, there's one. I hear it. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you, whoever did that. That was good. All right, marsupial frog. So terrestrial frog, not all frogs have tadpoles. This frog species bypasses the aquatic tadpole stage, and you can see right in here, they've got a little pouch. That's where their name comes from. They're called the marsupial frog or the pouched frog. They're not marsupials, but about 15 of their little froglets, they'll emerge straight out of the eggs, which are in the moist leaf litter, and then the father will carry them around in about 15 froglets in each of the pouches, one on each side of his body, for about a month while they develop. So a lot of amphibians do have parental care, often from the father. All right, so frogs are really cool, but unfortunately they're in a lot of trouble. At least 2,000 amphibian species worldwide threatened with extinction. Threatened with extinction means that if we don't do anything to protect them or remove those threats, then we can expect them to go extinct in the near future. There's also about 1,400 species that are considered data deficient. That means that we don't know enough about them to know what's happening to their populations. But usually those data deficient species, they're data deficient because they're hard to study. They're hard to study because there are so few of them. So we have to assume that a lot of these data deficient species are truly endangered as well. So it's about 1/3 of the world's amphibians are thought to be threatened with extinction, and unfortunately about a couple hundred species have gone completely extinct in the past 4 decades or so. This guy fortunately still remains. This is Australian lace-lid Nyctomystes dayi, which I was fortunate to find one night ever in Australia in the Tully Gorge in northeast Queensland. This species, though, did, along with several other species, disappear from their high mountain habitats, and they have yet to return. So they do survive in the lowland areas. All right, so why are the frogs disappearing? If we want to save the frogs, we have to know what's going on with the frogs. Number one, habitat destruction, especially in lowland areas. That's because most of our national parks and protected areas tend to be up high. We like how mountains look, and it's hard to live up in the mountains anyway, so why not protect that land? And then what happens is people like to live down in the flats and the lowlands by the ocean. So you've got a lot of people down low and not a lot of protected area, and you've got conflict. So a lot of habitat destruction in many different forms. That could be straight up logging. Santa Cruz long-toed salamander down in Santa Cruz County, and I believe Monterey County as well. Only 23 populations left. One of the problems they face is that their ponds, if they want to migrate between ponds, they've got to cross through inhospitable terrain, hot sun, roads, and potentially get run over or picked off by other species. Monocultures, sugarcane, illegal farming. So I visited Bangladesh and visited some of our Save the Frogs volunteers there. They took me out to Kadimnagar National Park. So this is a national park. There's a tea plantation there. There's people living in the park, all kinds of problems, even though it's a protected, theoretically protected area. Palm oil causing lots of problems for frogs, especially in Indonesia, Malaysia. Mining for gold and other minerals. All right, so habitat destruction, number one problem. But for the brightly colored species, there's another problem. That's people removing them from the wild to sell them as pets, especially poison dart frogs. This is a frog I found in one of the main science museums in Colombia. And it had actually been found by police at the airport in Bogota as someone was trying to export it, ship it out of the country. And so the police found the frog and gave it a good home in Parque Explora. Unfortunately, Colombia is home to a significant illegal exportation trade. Frog legs. About 1 billion frogs eaten around the world each year, which is clearly unsustainable. That's 1 billion frogs taken out of the wild each year. There's also hundreds of millions of frogs that are being farmed, which come along with its own set of problem, namely that usually they're non-native frogs are invasive frogs, usually American bullfrogs, which I'll be talking about, and a lot of them have diseases, specifically chytridiomycosis. So on the topic of frogs being eaten, our state amphibian, the California red-legged frog, which Save the Frogs helped get this frog to become the official state amphibian of California. This frog was nearly eaten to extinction by the California gold miners in the 1890s. All right, invasive species, trout in particular, get stocked into naturally fishless lakes and streams around the world, including in the Sierra Nevadas, and can cause complete local extinction of the amphibians there. They'll just eat all the amphibians there. If you remove the trout, which may be difficult if there are fishing lobbies that don't want that to happen, but if you do remove the trout, oftentimes the amphibians can return if there's some populations nearby. So that's one of the main problems for the mountain yellow-legged frogs, Sierra Nevada yellow-legged frogs as well. Threatened by non-native trout. They've disappeared from over 90% of their historic localities up in the Sierra Nevadas. Red swamp crayfish also cause problems. They're native to the southeast U.S., but they've been introduced into along the California coast and also in Spain and Portugal. And one of the world's worst invasive species, the American bullfrog, native to the eastern half of the USA and Canada. Largest frog in North America. Large frogs have large mouths. Frogs are gape-limited predators. They're going to eat whatever they can put into their mouth. And the American bullfrog, they can eat California red-legged frogs, which are the second largest frog. And they can also eat snakes, up to 30 plus inches in length. So they're voracious predators. They also can hold lots of chytridiomycosis without dying. So they're perfect vectors of chytrid fungus and they're spreading diseases. So this frog It's the number one frog farmed around the world, and they're invasive species in at least 15 different countries. They'll escape their farms, and they do quite well with establishing populations. And then when they do get shipped to places such as San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York, which are the three main ports of entry for them in the United States, they're often coming in buckets with, say, 30 frogs in a bucket. They're just crawling all over each other. Chytridiomycosis is a skin disease, waterborne. So one study showed that 62% of the incoming bullfrogs into California were infected with chytridiomycosis, the worst disease in recorded history, which I'll be talking about momentarily. All right, so pollution and pesticides. Amphibians have permeable skin. They're spending a lot of time in the water. Gravity is going to bring all the bad chemicals down into the water, and that'll cause lots of problems for amphibians. Atrazine, world's second most commonly used herbicide, number one most commonly detected pesticide in U.S. groundwater, rainwater, and tap water, can turn male frogs into females at 2.5 parts per billion. It's an endocrine disruptor, and Tyrone Hayes of UC Berkeley is the most well-known atrazine researcher. All right,
Dr.
bullfrog.
Kriger, we have a question in the chat from Emma asking if bullfrogs are farmed for food.
They sure are. That's the reason they're being farmed in general. So yeah, frog farms all around the world. A lot of them are in China, Taiwan, Brazil, Uruguay, and yeah, they're very high density. I should probably add it to my presentation. I have a video of a frog farm in China, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's like a million, literally a million frogs in the video, just like showing these ponds that are it's just nothing but frogs. They're just crawling all over each other. And so very dense conditions, like as far from social distancing as you could possibly imagine. So very bad conditions. And yeah, then they show up in America, and the water that they're in gets released into the wild. Some people buy them and set them free thinking they're doing a good job. Some of them probably escape, and there's now millions of bullfrogs in California and throughout the American West. All right, yeah, so if anyone else has questions, keep them coming in. Climate change, global warming, big problem for frogs, especially frogs up in high mountain areas. As you move up a mountain, there's less area. So as the earth heats up, if you have to keep moving up the mountain to stay in your expected temperature, eventually you're at the top of the mountain. There's no more area. There's no more land left. So frogs up in the mountains are having trouble. And also what happens is that as the earth warms up in tropical places, the cloud levels rise. So amphibians that are dependent on the moist leaf litter to put their eggs in, all of a sudden that land is drying up. So they're having problems, not just in the tropics though. Yellowstone National Park has had amphibian declines. They've had persistent droughts for decades. And so even though Yellowstone, or possibly even the world's oldest protected area, just because it's protected on paper, it's not protected from climate change or disease or potentially airborne pollutants. Chytrid fungus is what I did my Ph.D. research on. Batrachochytrium dendrobatitis, causative agent of the potentially lethal skin disease, chytridiomycosis, the worst disease in recorded history, not just for amphibians, for any organism we know of. It's driven about 100 amphibian species to complete extinction. And it causes most of the damage to high mountain, montane, stream-dwelling amphibian populations. Chytrid fungus does best in cool temperatures, and it cannot survive, it cannot thrive in dry weather. So places that are wet and cool, like a lot of mountains, it does a good job living, and it does a good job of being able to attack a lot of different amphibian species. So there are, unfortunately, though, some amphibian species that don't have, they can carry it, but usually not going to die, such as the American bullfrog. So an American bullfrog could have millions of chytrid zoospores on it, be doing just fine. American bullfrogs can live as tadpoles for a few years. So they're in the water for a few years, just holding the chytrid fungus and making sure that the chytrid fungus stays in the water, and that can cause lots of problems for native amphibians. So I talked about all these threats to frogs. They're all bad. Unfortunately, they're not all just happening one at a time. They're happening potentially at the same time. So put them together, you get synergistic effects, meaning that the final outcome is worse than the sum of the individual parts. And that's why amphibians are among the most rapidly disappearing animals on the planet. All right, so why should we care about frogs? Frogs are important for a variety of reasons. They're eating ticks, mosquitoes, flies, other disease vectors. They're an integral part of the food web. Not only are they eating those insects and eating pests of our agricultural crops, but they're also food for birds, fish, snakes, monkeys, dragonflies. Lots of animals depend on frogs, and if those animals disappear, then we've got even more problems. Let's see. All right, so perhaps controversial topic, but frogs are used in medical research that benefits humans, and about 10% of the Nobel Prizes in physiology and medicine have gone to researchers whose work depended on amphibians. So we do get a lot of benefit out of amphibians. This one right here, my favorite frog, southern orange-eyed tree frog, has antimicrobial peptides on its skin that can kill HIV. So there's research being done onto how to apply that for the benefit of humans. So if an amphibian species disappears, there goes any potential benefit to humans from having that amphibian alive. Frogs are bioindicators. If the frogs are disappearing, then it says something about our environment. They're sensitive to environmental change. They have the permeable skin. They cannot travel far, so if something goes wrong in their habitat, they cannot just fly off to the next forest like a bird potentially could do. And amphibians have been around for hundreds of millions of years. So they've survived countless ice ages, asteroid crashes, outlived the dinosaurs. If they're disappearing now, if a third of amphibian species are on the verge of extinction in the past several decades, it clearly says something's wrong in the environment that needs to get fixed. And of course, frogs are cool, which may be a reason that you're here tonight. Just because people like frogs, that's a good enough reason to save them. That's probably why I got into frogs. I just like frogs. This world's a better place with frogs around, and kids love frogs. And even aside from us liking frogs, is that the frogs have an inherent right to exist. They've been around longer than we have. They have every much right to be here as we do. All right, so it's up to all of you and to me to save the frogs. Fortunately, there's lots of ways that we can save frogs just by improving our ecological footprint. Not using pesticides, eating locally grown organic food that doesn't have pesticides, that wasn't shipped from other side of the planet, using up lots of fuel. Not eating frog legs, easy way to help. We can slow down driving on wet nights. Fortunately, in California, there are plenty of projects to assist amphibians across the road, including shutting down some roads, as I know they've done in the East Bay and maybe Sacramento area in the time of year when the amphibians are crossing. Don't purchase wild-caught amphibians. Best not to have an amphibian as a pet. If you do want to have an amphibian as a pet, make sure you do some research into it to make sure that you are as responsible a pet owner as you can be. And not stocking non-native fish. Always stick with native on your own property. turn off the tap so that we don't drain our rivers completely dry. Amphibians need that riparian habitat. They need the water in the river. Not purchasing bottled water. Use rechargeable batteries. Vote for the environment. Eat less meat. And if you're looking for another career, or perhaps you have kids, encourage them to pursue a career in environmental conservation. And spread the word about the amphibian extinction crisis. If people don't know there's a problem, then the politicians and the corporations aren't going to do anything to help, and people won't be improving their own ecological footprint. All right, so on that note, I'm sure most of you are ecologically knowledgeable in a lot of that, but I think it's always good to be reminded of those things, because also when we're talking to people, they like to ask, how can we help save the frogs? And starting with our own ecological footprint is certainly the ideal place to start. So now I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've done to save the frogs and what Save the Frogs is all about, I guess you could say, as an organization and some of our projects. Save the Frogs, as I said, I founded in 2008. Save the Frogs is a 501c3 public charity with a mission to protect amphibian populations and to promote a society that respects and appreciates nature and wildlife. So I'm going to be talking about some of our projects. Hey, let me switch. All right. Save the Frogs, translating science into action. One of the first things that I did when I started Save the Frogs, aside from creating SaveTheFrogs.com, which I encouraged all of you to go visit, is I started Save the Frogs Day because I thought that we need a day dedicated to amphibians as a way to get teachers and students and politicians involved. So I started Save the Frogs Day. It's the last Saturday of April. We celebrated the first annual Save the Frogs Day in 2009. And since then, we've had at least 1,400 events take place in 58 countries. My goal for Save the Frogs Day is to inspire people to get out into their community and do something beneficial for amphibians, and to provide people with ideas and educational resources so that they can go do something good for amphibians. I'm going to give you lots of ideas right now and show you some of the things that have taken place. So in 2011, I led a Save the Frogs Day rally at the steps of the U.S. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, to call for a federal ban on the use and production of atrazine. And we had about 40 people out there in front of the EPA, marched through D.C., went to the White House. EPA invited me to speak to their scientists a few days later, so I actually spoke 3 times at the EPA. They told me they'd have a decision on atrazine within a year and a half on whether or not to renew it. It actually took them about 10 years, and right now it looks like they're going to keep atrazine legal, unfortunately. As I said before, atrazine is the second most commonly used herbicide on the planet, known to cause male frogs to turn into females at 2.5 parts per billion. Santa Cruz, we held Save the Frogs Day events at Antonelli Pond to create better habitat for the endangered California red-legged frogs. Antonelli Pond has invasive weeds, which our volunteers are removing right here. Non-native fish, non-native crayfish, and bullfrogs. So that's the local high school volunteers out there. We've also had lots of scientists taking people out to show them frogs in their native habitats. A lot of people, especially if they grew up in a city, may never have seen frogs out in the wild. People don't usually like to go out on wet, rainy nights. So getting people to know their native amphibians is a great way to get them to care about amphibians. A lot of classroom events. This is in Nepal, and Save the Frogs art going on in this school in Vermont. And right in the middle here, Avalon Tyson. She's been holding Save the Frogs Day events for about 10 years. So this was probably in 2010 or so. She's still holding Save the Frogs Day events. In Nepal, they held their first ever national seminar on frogs on Save the Frogs Day. And this is an event in South Korea. They're celebrating this site right here where it's a wetland site, and they stopped the government from allowing high-rise apartments to be built there. And Uganda, this is a university group who held a Save the Frogs Day educational event. This is me at Parque Explora Science Museum in Medellin, Colombia. I held an info table there and gave a presentation in the auditorium as well. And Save the Frogs Day up at Yosemite National Park. National Park Service and National Wildlife Federation teamed up. They had Ranger Rick and our southern orange-eyed tree frog out there. In Bangladesh, they like to hold parades out in major urban centers to raise awareness, as well as taking university students out on field trips to learn about their local frogs. And this is an event in Nigeria that was funded by a Save the Frogs Day grant. And this is a school in Los Gatos, California. They went out on a bullfrog removal trip for Save the Frogs Day. University group in Colombia went out sampling for chytrid fungus up in the mountains where an Atelopus species lives. Atelopus, perhaps the most threatened of the amphibians. The genus Atelopus, about 67, last I heard 67 out of 110 of the Atelopus species were thought to be extinct. All right, Save the Frogs Day, great way to get publicity. Featured on the front page of Le Monde, the largest paper in France, where it's actually illegal to eat a native frog because they already ate most of their native frogs, unfortunately. And 2-minute spot on CNN Worldwide TV. And Save the Frogs Day, as I said, one of the reasons I started it was to get politicians educated about frogs. Save the Frogs Day has been officially recognized Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Michigan, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, as well as Washington, D.C., and some other major cities. And a couple of these places were because of some of our young supporters like Rachel Hopkins and Avalon Tyson, pictured here, who took it upon themselves to contact their politicians to get them involved. So Save the Frogs Day, as I said, takes place last Saturday of April every year. And that means it is coming up soon. 2 weeks from tomorrow will be the 13th annual Save the Frogs Day, April 24th, 2021. So not as many outdoor in-person events going on this year and last year for obvious reasons, but we will have the Save the Frogs World Summit will be happening again. Last year we had talks for about 24 hours straight, not the whole time, but basically going on for much of 24 hours because we get speakers from all around the world, so from all different time zones. So I'll be building the new Save the Frogs World Summit page any day now and announcing a new round of speakers. So I invite you all to attend that, and you'll be hearing from amphibian experts from around the world about the work that's going on in their part of the world.
Hey, Dr. Kriger,
Yeah.
there's some questions stacking up here in the chat.
Yeah, so I can see it. Let me read it out. So, if it's illegal to eat native frogs in France, can we assume they're mostly eating imported American bullfrogs? The last I heard, they were importing most of their frogs from Indonesia. So I'm sure that most of those are wild. Well, I'm not sure, but a lot of those frogs are wild caught. Last I heard, Indonesia was the #1 exporter of wild caught frogs. But yeah, that info was 8 or 9 years ago, and the American bullfrog farming trade, unfortunately, has grown a lot in the last decade. So it's probably a mix of American bullfrogs and some wild caught frogs. All right, so the next question is, do you have teachers' kits of activities? We don't have a teacher's kit, but something I was planning to talk about later. We have Save the Frogs Academy, savethefrogs.com/academy. and anyone can go there and get 28 days free full access, or you can become a Save the Frogs member and get ongoing access. But I encourage you, go to savethefrogs.com/academy, sign up for the 28 days free, and then there is a course in there called Teachers, and there's a course in there called Kids, and there's lots of other courses too. And there's a lot of downloadable. We've got like 2,000 pages of downloadable PDFs, of which a lot of them are dedicated to kids. And there's also lots of videos of presentations about lots of different aspects of amphibians. So that's what I'd suggest to get started. All right, next question is, if you have a picture of that big frog you mentioned and it's easy to retrieve, please show us the picture, and hopefully it's easy to see the scale with something like a ruler next to it. So I'm assuming that's referring to the American bullfrog. So how big does an American bullfrog get? I'm not sure, a few pounds probably. I mean, it's going to vary, but they can get pretty large. Are they easy to retrieve? I wouldn't say they're easy because they can jump a long way. They don't want to get caught. But if you go out with a trained bullfrog removal expert, then they can do pretty well. But certainly, yeah, I mean, people hunt American bullfrogs. So if that's what you want to do, then as far as I know, you don't need a permit, though you should go and do your, before you go removing frogs, first off, make sure you know what species it is, because the American bullfrog can be confused with California red-legged frog, which is federally protected. So you definitely don't want to harm a California red-legged frog. So first, make sure that your identification skills are good, and then, yeah, American bullfrogs, just confirm that you can remove them without a permit. Last I heard, that was the case, but look into that yourself. Next question, what do you do with the invasive bullfrogs you remove from the environment? I personally don't remove them, but there are people who do. There are some professionals who are being employed to remove them, employed either by nonprofit organizations or by the state of California, or perhaps other parts of the world. And then, yeah, sometimes there's just amateur people who go out there or hobby, whatever, members of the public who go out there and remove them. I don't know if that's, we don't organize that. Save the Frogs doesn't organize any bullfrog removal events. Controversial. It's got ethical issues, and it's just not what we do. But personally, like, I'd like all the American bullfrogs removed from California because it would be really good for native wildlife. I'd rather have native wildlife than just one species taking over. So, but what would a person do? I guess maybe you can clarify, like, how would one euthanize them? I'm not sure exactly what your question is. So maybe if you type in precisely what you want to know, I can give you a better answer. But yeah, I do want to clarify. Save the Frogs does not organize any bullfrog removal events. But if you do want to learn more, there's a good site from Canada, and I think it's called Bullfrog Control. Maybe bullfrog.ca or bullfrogcontrol.ca. Just type in bullfrog control, maybe with Canada or Vancouver after it, and you'll get it. All right, so I'm going to keep on moving through this. All right, so other Save the Frogs stuff going on. Save the Frogs projects. I've given a lot of presentations. I used to give a lot more, especially when people were gathering. I've given at least 430 presentations, directly reaching at least 23,000 attendees, and including a lot in California, where Save the Frogs, we were based in Santa Cruz from 2010 to 2013, and 2013, 2014 in Berkeley, right beside the Sierra Club office. We had a Save the Frogs Education Center, which I'll have a picture of shortly. So I gave a lot of presentations in the greater San Francisco area. And that is an important place because there has been some, we'll say, anti-frog legislation and some vetoing of some pro-frog legislation, unfortunately. So it is important to educate San Francisco community, especially, so that those problems don't happen in the future. And there is a massive bullfrog importation going on into San Francisco. Manor School in Fairfax, California. We were set to build a wetland there. We had experts from around the world planning to show up the next day. We had all the permissions that we knew of from the school, and then the superintendent called us up and said, don't come out. He didn't want a wetland. He actually said to me, can you verify there won't be any spiders that show up? So not everyone is environmentally friendly, and unfortunately in the bureaucratic system, sometimes some people would just rather go with the status quo and not have anything unknown, which I guess a wetland is if you don't know what's going on, and wetland on your property, hey. So that was unfortunate because the kids sure did want the wetland, and it would have been really good for the kids and for the science education there. All right, so yeah, this is a school in North Carolina, the most amphibious state in the Union, 91 known amphibian species, last I checked. And one of my favorite presentations, Seaview Elementary School, Salton City, California, down in the desert, rural area, mostly farm workers' kids. And they contacted me and said they wanted to do something good for the amphibians. And the kids wrote a letter to their assembly member, Manuel Perez, asking him to create legislation to get the California red-legged frog listed as California state amphibian. So myself and another Save the Frogs biologist went down there and gave presentations. Assembly member Perez's staff was there, and all the kids were there. And a couple months later, we went up to Sacramento, gave presentations, won this vote 8-0, and then won the next vote 52-8 to get the California red-legged frog as the state amphibian. Governor Jerry Brown signed that one into law. All right, so Team Red-Legged Frog. All right, other Save the Frogs projects. We've given out $101,398 in grants, 47 awardees in 16 countries to get valuable Indian projects taking place that probably would never have been able to come to be without that funding. Let me see what this question is. What's the best time of the day to look for frogs in the East Bay? In general, frogs are nocturnal, so they're coming out at night, but California does have plenty of activity during the day. So I think it's more a matter of what's the best time of year to look for frogs, and that's going to be in the wet season. So I think from about February to May or so. But yeah, you can. Pacific Coast frogs will be calling during the day for certain. So just if it's a rainy day, or if it's been raining recently, then that's going to be the best time. All right, Save the Frogs Academy, I mentioned before, online courses. Go get your 28 days free and check it out. Binge on amphibian conservation presentations and education. And then if you like it, as I said, if you become a Save the Frogs member, you get ongoing access to Save the Frogs Academy and some other benefits as well. Fowler's toads in Lake Erie region of Canada. There's only 3 known populations of the Fowler's toads in Canada. The Molinaro group of developers was planning to build an 11-story high apartment complex and restaurants right on top of one of them. Save the Frogs Academy put together a online class. What we would meet, and between the classes, the students would do something. That would be their homework. Do something to help that campaign to stop that apartment building from going up. And we succeeded, along with some partners in Canada. And that was about 7 years ago or so. Never got built. It got too controversial. They could not pre-sell the units. So help save those toads. I invite you all to attend Save the Frogs office hours. It's taking place once a month. It'll be coming up April 20th this month. So myself and Save the Frogs board member Mike Horton, who spent decades with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and is an endangered species expert, we're on there once a month, taking questions about anything related to amphibians and environmental careers and implementing projects on behalf of amphibians. So try to join that if you can. Alameda Creek, Sinal Wilderness, San Francisco, I believe PUC was planning to build right in the middle of the creek. They want water. They must own the water rights, even though it's down in Alameda Creek. And they were going to do some construction right on top of foothill yellow-legged frog habitat. And I wrote the city several letters, never got a response. And then Save the Frogs hired an environmental attorney to send a letter. And within 10 days, San Francisco stopped that project. So at least at that one little spot, we helped save the foothill yellow-legged frogs. Unfortunately, they do have a lot of problems because they're heavily impacted by all the dams that get built around the state because it changes the water flow and the water temperature. California tiger salamanders, we helped get listed as threatened under the State Endangered Species Act. 452 supporters sent in letters to the California Department of Fish and Game, as it was called then, and we won that with a 3-2 vote. So that kind of reminded me how important it is to take part in raising our voices when there are these votes, because they are often very close. Keeping non-native frogs out of California. I first spoke to the California Fish and Game Commission in May of 2010, urging them to stop allowing the importation of literally millions, 2 to 3 million non-native American bullfrogs into the state each year. And unfortunately, the Fish and Game Commission and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife continue to issue permits and have done almost nothing to prevent the problem. The best that they did, which I do congratulate them on, is that their scientists, their own staff, put out a very thorough report in 2015 or so, detailing the harms caused by American bullfrogs and recommending that the permitting program needs to stop or significantly get reduced. But unfortunately, the department and the commission have not done anything. So we continue to work on that issue. I'm part of a stakeholder group currently going on it's been going on a long time. Government is not very fast, especially in California. The goal of that stakeholder group, though, is to deliver a report to the commission with recommendations. I never thought it was needed because everyone already knows what needs to get done, but that's how the government works. So I've been part of that process. So hopefully we will see something change, because currently millions of bullfrogs keep on coming in every year. And that's what it looks like when they're getting sold in Chinatown. Whole lot of bullfrogs crawling all over each other. All right, so let's see. Question: is there a website or app that can ID the frog species based on a sound recording? There's definitely plenty of websites that have recordings so that you could go listen to the recordings, but I don't know if there's one where you can just upload your call, but it may exist. I haven't searched for it. What I suggest, though, good way to start, as I mentioned before, there's amphibiaweb.org. You can go click search the database and then click your part of the world that your frog was found in Arizona. Go click on the state of Arizona. It'll pull up a list of all the species in the state, and perhaps even with pictures. Otherwise, just type in frogs of your part of the world. Hopefully you'll find a site that's got a listing of common amphibian species found, and with photos, and hopefully you can ID it. Maybe have some calls on there too. I think Lang Elliott has a CD, Frogs and Toads in North America. Or yeah, it was released as a CD. I don't know what it is currently. So building a frog pond is one of the best ways that you can help amphibians. As I said, habitat destruction is the #1 cause of amphibian disappearance. So by building a frog pond, you're going to be helping out amphibians. Here's a frog pond. This won the Save the Frogs Build a Frog Pond contest back in 2011 or so, right in the middle of San Francisco. And there were Pacific course frogs in here, and they keep that gate over it to keep the kids out, I believe. So this is Save the Frogs Wetlands team in El Dorado National Forest. We teamed up with the U.S. Forest Service and other federal, state, local agencies and nonprofits to build wetlands for California red-legged frogs, which had not been seen in El Dorado National Forest in about 50 years, but within a year of us building the wetlands, they were back breeding in the forest. And a pond we built in Ben Lomond, California in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Kids get a good science education, good exercise, a natural classroom. And we got about 700 kids and teachers, pretty much all the students and teachers from Clifford School in Redwood City. Helped out over the course of 2 days to build 6 ponds on the property. Kids love it. And let's see. It's the only picture I got of it afterwards. Not the best picture, but every school I've ever gone to that has a pond on the property or that has frogs on the property, those kids are always much more excited about frogs than other places. So if you can get a frog pond built at your local school, great way to get kids interested in amphibians and to help out. We built this pond over the course of a day in Watsonville, 3 endangered amphibian species in the region. And I invite all of you to learn a lot about building wetlands and help build wetlands with Save the Frogs and the U.S. Forest Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service this April. I believe it's about April 19th through May 8th, 7 days a week. So if you want to go up to the Tahoe National Forest and help out, ideally for a few days or more, but you could show up for a day. Go to savethefrogs.com/Tahoe, and there's a form you can fill out that form, and then the U.S. Forest Service will be in touch with you. Save the Frog's been leading eco tours since 2013. We've held eco tours. They're usually about 10 to 12 days long. We take groups of frog lovers out into the rainforest and other amphibian habitats. We've done that in Belize, Peru, Ecuador, and Costa Rica, where we will be returning this June 18th through 29th. It was originally intended to be families only, but we've actually just opened it up to everyone. So whether or not you are with your family, there are still some spaces remaining. June 18th to 29th in Costa Rica, we will find lots of frogs and all types of other wildlife as well. So come on down. Let me know if you're interested in joining. Yeah, so I'm curious, maybe chat in. I can't see people with my current, with the screen up here, but if you ever visited the Save the Frogs Education Center right on San Pablo back in 2013, 2014, let me know. So we had a office, gift center, and we'd have various amphibian education events going on there. All right, so Florida pig frogs we helped save. Got restaurant Gary Danko in San Francisco to stop serving frogs, and also got frog legs out of all 77 of the Wegmans supermarkets, an East Coast supermarket chain. We've had frog legs protests in the past. It's been a long time, but we had protests at various restaurants that refused to stop serving frog legs. And one of my favorite pictures right here, some kids, I didn't know they were coming out. They were on the Save the Frogs newsletter list and took it upon themselves to come out and asked this restaurant to stop serving frog legs, which it since has stopped. So we also got the help get the New Zealand government to stop a mining project that would have perhaps driven the Archie's frog #1 most evolutionarily distinct and globally endangered frog. It's been voted that. Um, it almost certainly would have gone extinct had they mined on its habitat. In California, we got over 2,000 Save the Frog supporters to send letters to the National Park Service back about 10 or 11 years ago, asking them to remove non-native fish from about 60 water bodies in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park, and that got approved. And it took about 7 or 8 years before they started doing the work because it had to go through so many different approval processes. But another victory. And what I consider our most significant legislative victory, Save the Frogs and Center for Biological Diversity submitted a petition to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that got approved to stop the importation and interstate transportation of 201 salamander species. And the goal of that was to prevent the importation of Batrachochytrium salamandra vorans, another chytrid fungus that has caused significant problems to salamanders in Europe. I led a 5-day training in Panama at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, and that was to train 25 biologists from Costa Rica, Colombia, and Panama in how to detect the chytrid fungus using quantitative PCR. We've also gotten dissections out of at least 18 different schools. Unfortunately, a lot of frog dissection continues to take place not just in America but around the world. Most teachers, most schools, they don't have any idea where those frogs are coming from. And this is in southeast Alameda County. If you all want to get, you probably already are involved in this. I'm not sure, but if not, could certainly use your help. Tesla Park, California State Parks, Off-Highway Motor Vehicle Recreation Division, I believe is what it's called. They've been trying to open up Tesla Park to off-highway vehicles for many years, and it would absolutely destroy the land and cause lots of problems for the amphibians there. Yeah, so we've gotten large posters like 10 feet across in major airports around the country: Chicago, O'Hare, Denver International, educating hopefully hundreds of thousands of people about amphibians. Some of these posters have been up there for 6-7 years. Let's see. All right, so Latin America is actually the most, probably the most important place from an amphibian perspective because it's got the highest biodiversity of amphibians and also, unfortunately, the highest number of amphibian extinctions. A lot of those extinctions taking place up in the Andes, up in the mountains. As I said, chytrid fungus causes most of its problems up in the high mountain areas. So throughout Latin America, we have a lot of contacts throughout Latin America. There's a huge interest in amphibians among university students and professors throughout Latin America. So that's a good sign. 2010, I was invited to South Korea to represent the USA in Korea's first International Amphibian Symposium. Spent 10 days traveling around the country, providing advice to non-profit organizations there. Unfortunately, Korea's got 50 million people living in a small area, which causes a whole lot of habitat destruction. All right, so ongoing Save the Frogs art contest, one of our most successful educational and artistic endeavors. We've had probably but this number is a bit out of date. It's probably closer to 16,000 entries that have been submitted from artists in 91 countries at least. And this has been really great because a lot of teachers may not have any background in amphibians, but if they can get their kids to go to savethefrogs.com, learn about frogs, draw some frog art, then the kids pick up some good education. We can see how much they learn right in the art. This is a grand prize winner from 2011. We can see habitat destruction, pollution, deformed amphibians, frog legs, pet frogs, frog dissections, climate change, and invasive species all in one piece of art. Here's some frog art from a 16-year-old girl from California. And this is by Nick Gustafson, who's submitted tons of amazing frog art to Save the Frogs, including this one, California red-legged frog, which was a grand prize winner in 2014 or 2015. This right here from Leah Klenn, she was 16 at the time she submitted this. This was the first piece of frog art that we ever received, and she's actually the one who thought of having a Save the Frogs art contest. So I always thought that was pretty cool. 16-year-old girl who, helped get started one of our most successful program that's impacted people all around the world. And this was our most recent winner, 2020. Go to savethefrogs.com/art and click on the link to get to the 2020 art, and you'll see some pretty amazing art up on that page. And one of our Save the Frogs artists from China. This year, it'll change year to year what countries take part the most. This year we had a lot of art from China and from Russia as well. And we've also had a Save the Frogs poetry contest. I'm working on reviving the poetry contest. And we created the Save the Frogs Little Book of Frog Poetry. It's illustrated with art from the art contest. And sometimes I like to just open up to a random page and pick a poem and recite it. So I'll read this one from Graciela Chico from the Philippines. Frogs need help now, and it's with art, some Save the Frogs art from Bangladesh. All right, so frogs need help now. Frogs are disappearing quick. You can help with just one click. Go to savethefrogs.com. Get your frog saving on. All right, I'll read another one. This one's a bit more serious. Small Amphibious Soul by Joseph R. Calamaya from Texas. And I believe this was a runner-up one year. Small Amphibious Soul. A small, ancient amphibious soul, webbed feet, slimy mucus skin, eyes, sometimes red, green, or even gold. A creature now endangered, or so I've been told, without him a world sterile, archaic, and utterly cold. The frog, a small, ancient amphibious soul. Yeah, if you do go to Save the Frogs Academy and get your 28 days free access, go click on the course called Books, and you can download a PDF of the Little Book of Frog Poetry, as well as the story of Save the Frogs and the Amphibian Love art book, it's called, which is by Leah J., a South Bay frog artist, and various other books. You can get the PDFs there. All right, so here, one of my all-time favorite frog poem. This was the grand prize winner in 2009, written by 12-year-old Brittany Bellinger. Frogs, the pinwheel of our earth, the binding of our book, the balance of our world, almost gone. The wheel will slowly stop turning, the binding slowly unravel, the balance disturbed. Frogs, the glue holding our ecosystem together, slowly beginning to fade like the perfect morning, fading into a thick canopy of darkness. Our world as we know it will change. The frogs are the answer, the key to turn the lock, the cure to many diseases, but they're almost gone. What will you do? All right, so I'm going to bring this to a close, go through this real fast right here. So I spent about 6 months in India and Bangladesh a few years ago, and we held a Save the Frogs World Summit in Calcutta over the course of 2 days. Had a couple hundred people come out, lots of speakers from India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Had a World Summit for kids one morning. And one of our art schools there that we've supported. It's our frog field trip. Visited the World Wildlife Fund in New Delhi and gave a couple presentations there. And visited this school that helped protect this pond right here where a factory had been planned to be built. All right, so if anyone ever wants to help out and volunteer, let me know. or go visit our savethefrogs.com/volunteers page. There's some ideas there. And I am currently the only person at Save the Frogs who gets paid. Everyone is volunteer other than myself. For several years, we had up to maybe 5 or 6 employees, plus we had an international branch in Ghana with about 5 or 6 employees. But these days we are primarily a volunteer force. So if you want to help out, that would be great. If you want to donate, that would certainly be appreciated. SaveTheFrogs.com/donate. And I encourage you all to become a member of Save the Frogs. If you cannot afford to become a member by donating, then we do offer scholarships as well. So for every paid membership or membership via donation, I'll say, we do give out one scholarship to someone in need so that anyone can become a member if they are dedicated to amphibians. If they're in need, they go to savethefrogs.com/scholarships and apply, and most of the applicants do get accepted, and that covers their membership. All right, SaveTheFrogs.com, I haven't even really talked about other than mentioning it. It's definitely one of my favorite Save the Frogs projects. I've put thousands of hours into building the Save the Frogs website. It's got at least 1,000 pages of information. Pretty much anything I've talked about today is probably on there in even more depth. So if you're on social media, please do go connect with Save the Frogs at Save the Frogs on pretty much any of the major social media channels. And my email address, Kerry@SaveTheFrogs.com. You can also write contact@SaveTheFrogs.com. And I invite you all to stay in touch. Thank you so much for helping Save the Frogs. Thanks, Liz, for organizing this. Thanks to everyone who has listened through this. And thanks again for all your Sierra Club efforts on behalf of the environment. Please spread the word. And if you have any questions, I can take some more questions right now.
I had a question in the chat. Are frogs always freshwater creatures?
Yeah, they're frogs, because they have permeable skin, they cannot survive in salt water because of osmosis. All the salt, all their water would go out into the salt water around them, and they would dry out. So yes, frogs are. So there are a couple species. Bufo marinus gets its name because it can survive some brackish water, so a little bit of saltiness. But in general, frogs, you're only going to find them in fresh water. All right, thank you, Susan. And let's see, I got a question. Is the frog art on the website? Yeah, there's frog art that's throughout the website, but also if you go to savethefrogs.com/art, you can see a lot on that page. And then the best page to click through is the 2020 Save the Frogs art. And there should be some of the old other years art up there. But yeah, throughout the website, there'll definitely be art all around.
Any other questions or comments? Before we close, just let me mention next month in May, we will be meeting with another scientist who's also an artist. Her name is Laura Cunningham. She is with the Western Watershed Project, and she uses photos of existing areas within California and reimagines what it must have looked like thousands of years ago. And so it's a very interesting way to look at science and also look at the past and see what the world used to be like before it got settled by people from other countries. So that will be next month. Hope to see you all there. Dr. Kriger, thank you again very much. This was amazing.
Thank you. I'm happy to have you all as an audience, and I appreciate you putting this all together.